morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the Cartus Forum. What's happening in the House of Goods arena? My name is Tom Lacey. I'm Director of Supply Chain Management here at Cartus and will be your moderator for the next hour. I've been with Cartus for just over 20 years, started in corporate finance and accounting, moved into our real estate division probably for about 12 years or so, and then over into supply chain about 4 years ago. And I managed the international domestic household goods as well as our booking team. I'd like to begin with a little housekeeping for today's session. This webinar is being recorded and we will make it available to you after the session. All attendees will be in listen-only mode for the entire event. At the end of the session, if we have time, we'll be opening up for audience for Q&A. If you have a question in reference to today's topics, you can submit it through the chat function. And feel free to direct your question to a specific panelist if you'd like. Don't forget, any question you send can be viewed by all attendees. Okay, let's meet our panel for today. So joining us in this webinar will be Ryan McConnell, Vice President, Strategic Planning, Atlas Van Lines. Tracy Cole, General Manager, Harp International Group. David Marks, President, New World Van Lines and New World International. And Derek Duffy, President, Armstrong Moving. As well as my Cartus colleagues, Brenda Downey Johnson, Director, Strategic Business Development, and Daniel Gerlich, Director, Global Talent Mobility, who will join us throughout to provide color on current prospect and client experiences within the House of Goods arena. I'll let them speak to their roles and experience. In the meantime, welcome and thank you so much for joining us. Globally, all areas of supply chain have been impacted in some form or fashion, but our focus today will take a deeper dive, look into how our clients and transferees can be better equipped for the year ahead. As we're all very well aware of the hurdles we collectively had to navigate during this past year, our networks did an outstanding job in what some have deemed to be the most challenging they have ever seen. Collaboration between our suppliers, supply chain teams, and our global account management teams have assisted in mitigating some of the challenges while being creative with others. We continue to be in constant dialogue with our entire networks on how to improve the overall experience. During this session, our panel of experts will share their experiences of 2021, expectations of this year, as well as a forward look into the household goods industry, including some of the following. Best practices for companies to follow when scheduling future moves. Top tips for our relocating employees using household goods services. And ways how our suppliers are approaching the current challenges. Okay, let's get started. So the first question I'm going to direct to Derek. Given all the international obstacles in the last year, what do you feel was the most challenging for your company and how are you working to improve upon this area?
Hey, thanks, Tom. Good morning, everyone. Greetings from Toronto, Canada. I'm based here in Toronto, and a little bit about me before I tackle your question, Tom. I've been with Armstrong Moving for 32 years, from a summer student to a president and now owner. What a journey that's been. But I can tell you that in the last couple of years, I've not seen any challenges or obstacles like this one. This is a doozy, yeah. It's difficult really to kind of pinpoint one, Tom, but we certainly have empathy and compassion for what the employees' experience has been over the last couple of years. All the uncertainty and unpredictability, the delays, and the cost increases, and that's not lost on us at all. In fact, one of our biggest challenges is kind of internally dealing with that. You know, messaging the assignee on a day in and day out basis with uncertainty. We're not sure when it's going to be released from the port. We're not sure when the container is going to be available. And over time, that's a difficult message. So it's difficult to receive the message as the assignee. It's also difficult to give the message as well. But there's lots of positive in this as well. It's given us the opportunity really to get closer with our employee base. It's allowed us to, and forced us, if you will, to implement some wellness programs that we've done here at Armstrong. We've got some retention strategies in place. The war for talent is not only out there in the global corporate arena, it also impacts household good moving companies as well. It's difficult for us to find talent as well. So we're all kind of in it together, I would say. And if I looking forward in terms of the challenges we have, what's coming, I believe, strongly believe in 2022 is predictability and stability. And I think that's those two things have really been not present during this pandemic period. So I think there's a lot to be hopeful for. I think there's greener pastures ahead. But yeah, that's a little bit of my comments, Tom, on what our biggest challenge here is at Armstrong. Thanks for the question.
Awesome. Thanks, Derek. Um, Predictability and stability, those are key, right? Tracy, anything from your side with ARPAN you could pinpoint?
Yeah, first, hello everyone. A little bit about me. I've been with Arpin for 22 years. Much like Derek, I've grown up with the company, started there, remain here. And I'm very fortunate that for 18 of those years, I've been able to work with Cartus. So I'm happy to be here today, talk a little bit about this wild ride we've been on for the past couple of years and where we're going moving forward. So um, I think I would really echo Derek's sentiments. It's really difficult to pinpoint just one thing, right? I think it's the cumulative effect of all the challenges that we've faced over the past couple of years, um, almost wholly out of our control as an industry, and how to continue to deliver a quality product to our clients and customers has been probably the overarching challenge for us.
Okay, great. Thanks, Tracy. And Ryan, too, from a domestic side, what do you feel is most challenging for you at Atlas? And obviously, your quick intro before that.
Sure. Yeah, and much like my colleagues are going to probably hear some of the same sentiments and kind of like them as well. Been in this industry a long, long time. Working on my 27th year right now, and I actually did have a about a 2-year hiatus and worked in a office furniture manufacturing industry. So kind of related to what we do and trying to apply some of those principles as well. Done a little bit of everything in the business from operations to sales to business development, and now my role in strategy for the company and really for the overall enterprise. So a lot of good work, a lot of good people in this industry, and I think it's going to show through in right the longevity of the people that you find in it. Um, Challenges on the domestic side, probably pretty commonplace. I think what I've seen now is the domestic component really has been threaded into really a global perspective that we didn't have before. Right, it was really easy to go across the border to Canada and come back. It's much more difficult now. It's right, how do I interact with ports and what influence does that have on an overall basis? And then quite frankly, it really comes down to that labor. And when I say that, right, we've all seen that in the field. We're now starting to experience that, I'll say more on the office side. When we push people back to work from home, we really started to see that strain that was pushing back on us from that admin burden side. And how do we deal with that? Didn't necessarily have that before the pandemic. And I think that leadership of those teams that are remote and being able to pull them back in and then start to gain them back, and that more return to the office feature has been really part of the challenge for us. I think it's probably shared by a lot of folks that are on this call as well. And I know it's one that has strained and tested leadership for everybody. And it's one that I think, right, as we adapt and overcome, that's been the biggest challenge for us.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. And last but not least, David, and maybe I'll just repeat the question too. From a new world perspective, what do you feel is most challenging over last year, and how are you working to improve this?
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it. A little bit about me. I'm been in this role since 1996. I am third generation owner. I've worked in the business since 1980 after I graduated from Loyola University. And I'm also on the executive committee of the American Trucking Association and the current chairman of the American Trucking Association Moving and Storage Conference. So I'm very honored to be here, part of this esteemed panel. And Tom, there's lots of challenges out there, but our number one challenge is drivers, right? Drivers and movers. Those that go inside the home, we can't lower our standards. We got to make sure we got the right people in the homes, and we make sure that we do that. And how have we adjusted is pretty simple. We have looked at how we manage our crews and how long they're away from home. They wanted to stay closer to home, so we've gotten them to be able to do that. We haul more of the trailers by our freight division, where we go from point A to point B with non-household good drivers, just freight drivers, and that keeps our drivers in their local area. Nobody wanted to be 2,000 miles away from their loved ones during the last 2 years and endure all the challenges that they have out there in the marketplace. So driver challenges, but it's starting to recede. I think the Amazons, the UPSs, the FedExes have hired as not much drivers as they need now. So they're not out there hunting our drivers down. And it gives us the ability to retain our drivers, obviously paying them more and giving them better benefits. But those are our challenges, and we're working through them. And I think we're on the upside of it now.
Awesome. Great. Thanks, David. Another question, Ryan, I'll direct this one to you. Domestically, what guidance are you providing to your clients to ease the situations we're all facing when moving in the current environment?
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, I think to kind of piggyback from what David just was stating, right? It is awareness of what's happening in the marketplace, making sure that we're all seeing that through the same lens. Interestingly, right, as we face the supply chain challenges in the transportation arena that we've seen, that's really been magnified, I think more so than what it has in the past for the understanding of everyone that's involved. Um, Ultimately, it comes down to really communication. And I know we all beat that word up a lot. And what we try and push now to the clients is that continual communication component, where we might have been able to meet once or twice throughout a year. Things are changing so rapidly. We've tried to elevate that level of communication, identify the touch points that are right, those things that may be out of control as opposed to in the span of control. And as we do that, we eliminate that surprise factor in what we're trying to do and accomplish. So I know we'll all beat that topic up. I know communication always becomes a buzzword, but it's how you approach it differently than what we have in the past.
Great. Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, communication, right, is key and no surprises as well, right? Tracy, from an international perspective, anything you want to add here?
Yeah, I mean, I think Ryan hit the nail on the head. It's setting proper expectations. Educating our clients and the transferring families is for us the key always. And in this environment, it's more important and more challenging than ever to do that. It's a lot of our guidance over the past year has looked a lot like telling our clients to expect the unexpected, right? We can't predict costs. We can't, the instability in the markets, the unpredictable transit times, and the snowball effect that all those things create, right? So, for our individual transferees and their families, I think we're having, to Ryan's point, more consistent, more thorough, more in-depth conversations with them about what their experience is going to look like versus what their initial expectation may have been. Things will go wrong, delays, and sometimes significant delays will happen. um, and just trying our best to plan for those things really proactively, knowing that it's a very high likelihood that they'll take place. But as Derek said a little earlier, I think the good news is there's finally a light at the end of the tunnel. I think we're starting to see increased capacity in certain markets. I think that will continue to improve. I think costs will begin to stabilize. So I think the hope is by the end of 2022, we'll be looking at a lot of this in the rearview mirror.
Awesome. Excuse me. Awesome. Derek, David, anything to add there on either side of the equation?
Yeah, I would just add. I mean, this is echoing really what Ryan and Tracy have said. Just this resetting of expectations that needs to happen. It's the setting expectations and resetting. Unfortunately, it's resetting and resetting and resetting. And I think that's a little bit where the frustration from the assignee experience comes in. Well, last week you told me this. This week you're telling me another story, and it really, puts our credibility and trust on the line, because if I slip myself into the assignee shoes, which I think we all try to do, I mean, my fellow panelists, I know this is how we run our businesses, always trying to put yourself into the assignee shoes. And man, like, I'm getting 3 different stories, 3 different weeks. Like, where is the truth? Where are my goods? Do they have any actual control here? And I think that so it's really for our job to establish that trust, even though we're kind of changing the story every week, if you will, or maybe not even changing the story, but there's no news. There's no news. There's no news. So I think that in terms of, the guidance that we would have is that, if there was any sort of communication to be given at the front end, is a little bit to what Tracy said: expect the unexpected. And it's a terrible message to say, hey, we're going to move you from point A to point B, And by the way, there's going to be all kinds of uncertainties surrounding it. So good luck to you and your family. Like that's a very challenging message to send out. But I think the way we can control it is really just that steady stream of communications, that steady resetting of communications, establish that trust. Don't wait for them to contact you for an update. Be proactive, be ahead of it. And that oftentimes sort of calms the waters a little bit when we're proactive on it as opposed to the reactive. Oh, let me check. I'll go back. Let me go check. That doesn't work. That does not work. So proactive, getting ahead of it, calms the waters, steadies the waters, and establishes, in most cases, the trust again. So yeah, a little bit of the same, said differently.
Great, thanks, Derek. So we'll move on to another question. David, I'll point this one to you. Domestically, is there anything we can do from an industry perspective to maximize efficiencies in terms of coordination, scheduling, packing, and/or delivery?
Yeah, Tom, that's a great question. And there's a number of ways of doing that in our belief, and I think the other panelists would agree. And planning is one of them, right? Because setting the customers' dates, making sure we get the dates early enough to understand that what the schedule is, and then not changing those dates. People think they can change dates on a moment's notice, and that creates all sorts of issues. One of the big benefits, I don't want to make this sound like a commercial doing it with Cartus, is we get to see all the moves, and then we get to select the moves that best fit our system. The one challenge we have is there's no move refused, right? So if nobody selects a move, that move gets pushed. I can tell you it's a very small percentage of moves that get pushed into our direction, because all the carriers realize that they have to continue to take moves and take even some that are out of their route to make sure they can cover those moves. Um, that's the biggest part of it is selecting the locations to and from where you have your crews, where you have your drivers, where you can perform the best service to the customer and make sure that customer's service levels remain extremely high. Um, but beyond that, we also need to make sure that the customer, and I said this earlier, don't change your dates. People think it's like a hotel reservation, just go change your dates. Well, that doesn't happen, because the hotel gets full, the plane gets full, and then there's no capacity to handle that move, and it changes the routing completely. So that's I think is the most important part. Dates, making sure you get the dates set up early, and so people understand it. Visual surveys, we've changed how we do that. We're now doing virtual surveys. I think that was something the industry was touching on, and now it has jumped into there and done the virtual surveys. Gives us a picture of everything we need to see ahead of time. So there's a lot of good changes that have happened and that are working, and that we'll continue to use as we move forward.
Great. Great, thanks, David. Derek, anything here you want to comment on from the international side that you see too?
Yeah, I mean, much of the same a little bit. David kind of was on point there. David also brushed on lead times. I mean, if there was one ask we could have from the corporate mobility side, is that lead time for us is really a critical success factor. The more advanced notice we have of assignments of relocations, just the better chance we have of getting the right crew underneath it and locking in. I mean, we totally get it. The business lines that our corporate mobility teams are managing, and they just simply receive a move and it's got to happen next week. Those are going to happen. That's always been part of our space. The more we can minimize those last minute moves and the more lead time we can add to the initiations, really, we're really starting on the right foot then. It really allows us the opportunity to look at our resources, plan, and execute a much better chance of getting a top block service in that environment than when it's kind of all rush at the last minute. That being said, we also know the nature of the business that you're all in as well. It happens. The other thing I will add, and again, it's not a commercial for Cartus, but the Acadia system that's used to distribute the international business is really a time-tested product. We've been working with it for many years now, and it really gives most competitive pricing in real time. And I think it's a great tool for your clients. It's super easy for us to work with, by the way, and it's very efficient. So in terms of coordinating that side of things, we see all the moves and we can bid on lanes appropriately. The most competitive rates available are there. There's still the uncertainty space a little bit with the spiked freight rates, but as Tracy hinted, stability is coming on pricing in 2022. We've already seen signs of plateauing, especially in the APAC region, where that was a real challenge for us. Anything into and out of Asia was a real challenge. But but yeah, I think lead time and having a great system like Acadia, is really pluses from our side.
Awesome. Thanks, Derek. Dan, I think you wanted to comment in here too as well.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I just wanted to highlight how critical it is for that lead time. Again, I've worked several and am working on several critical projects for my clients where either critical moves or mass mobilizations are happening, and even in advance of specific authorizations and specific move dates being locked in, it's important just to have that collaboration about the potential activity so we can prep our suppliers for it. And, I can tell you I've had some success over the past year with some very senior level moves in which we were given notification probably 6 months in advance of when the moves actually needed to take place without any specifics. And we were able to line up the necessary suppliers so that when the moves had to happen in the middle of the summer and during peak capacity, we had solid crews and we were able to provide an excellent experience. It's really critical. So I would encourage all corporate attendees to deliver that message to leadership. So if there is anything that's being discussed, they understand that it's important to bring you in early on so we can properly plan and make sure it's a great experience.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. I see all the panelists nodding their heads, so I'm sure everybody's in fair agreement with that too as well. Let's move on to the next question. So we hear a lot that the U.S. supply chain needs to be reimagined and better coordinated, meaning coordination between ports, truckers, railroads. What would this look like and how will it impact their industry? Tracy, is there any examples you could share from what your theory is or thoughts on this from the ARPAN side? Oh, I think you're on mute.
I figured I was going to do that at least once.
That's all right. You're good. You're good. No
From
worries.
from an international perspective, it's no surprise to anybody here on the panel or anybody who's joined us today. It's the swell in demand for goods just really exposed all the cracks in the U.S. supply chain, right? There's labor shortages. David touched on the driver shortages. In addition, a lot of the bottleneck that we're experiencing is because 50% of the imports into the U.S. come into the West Coast, right? So you've got a swell in demand and a lack of investment in our port systems back a few decades. So what you've got are outdated systems. You've got lack of technology. You've got local governments that are in control of these ports that service the whole of the country. So convincing local cities and municipalities to make an investment in the infrastructure is a big ask. So that's part of the reason we find ourselves in the situation that we're in. I think the good news is it's spurred a lot of conversation about what's going to happen short term and long term. And some of the examples are in California, you could only stack containers too high at the port. You can imagine with all that freight coming in and only being able to stack containers too high, safety concerns, this is earthquake country, that the ports are filling up very quickly. That's why you see a line of vessels waiting to be serviced offshore. So the mayor of Los Angeles was able to lift those restrictions temporarily so that we could move freight in and out a little bit more expeditiously, right? There's talk about using some smaller secondary ports, barging containers from the ports that are overloaded to smaller secondary ports to get that flow of traffic moving a little bit more quickly. And I think importantly, long term, the US government's just passed an infrastructure bill. There's funding there for port improvement. I think, we'll be looking at some improvements in the port system, as a result of that as well.
Great. Thanks, Tracy. Ryan, from a domestic side, anything in Atlas that you see here?
Yeah, it actually is really interesting as Tracy starts to explain that, right? And we did see those same impacts. And when, right, you start to stack containers and, right, you start to see chassis depletion, then you start to see things that we'd rely on, as David mentioned earlier, from using freight carriers to move our goods. It really put a strain on us. And I think that's where that global perspective started to reel back in. The interesting part to me, I think there's a lot of technology, a lot of process. I think there are pieces inside of the supply chain that could be reevaluated, re-engineered. But it's always interesting to listen to, right, the news reports, and when you hear, right, the supply chain collapse and catastrophe, and I didn't see it that way. I saw that it started to bend. I don't know that it necessarily ever broke. There were pieces or parts, different ports, different railways, right? You started to see it, but as we really progressed through this, what you started to realize is that supply chain was set up to handle about a 2% annual growth. And just saw a report this morning that we were in the US at about a 5.5 to 6% growth. That supply chain wasn't ever designed to handle the demand being placed on it, and ran out of the supply that was available to try and pull, move, ship, barge, all of those types of items. So, yeah, for me, this became more of a global picture, even though we were, right, looking at domestically in the US. So how do we react to that? And I think that's going to be the process changes. I think that's the investments that Tracy was talking about. I think we'll start to see some of those items now that'll prepare us to say, okay, if this does ever have a growth that's bigger than the norm, will it be ready? Will we be ready to supply and change and adapt as that happens? So it's just an interesting global perspective that we typically wouldn't have looked at from a US centric perspective in the past, that I think we can no longer ignore.
Great feedback, Ryan, too. David, anything to add here, or thoughts, or you're on mute? David, you're on mute. You're good.
I thought I unmuted myself. I guess I muted myself. Yeah, I think the biggest strain, and that's not going to go away, is this last mile. So everybody wants their packages delivered to their home. You could see 3 different package delivery guys show up every day. The statistics from the American Trucking Association says there were 161,000 jobs created to do that last mile delivery to your home. So you can imagine where those drivers came from, where they were. They were absorbed from a lot of different industries, and some of it came from the household good industry. So I think we're challenged by that, and even corrugated. We saw big spikes in corrugated because every box that's delivered to your house is more boxes than we've ever purchased in the United States for delivery of products. So we've created this ourselves by having everything delivered to our home in a box. And now we have a spike in prices and a shortage of drivers on the household goods side because of all those last mile deliveries we're doing.
Great, thanks, David. Derek, anything else here?
Yeah, I feel as being the token Canadian on the panel, it's time to get a Canadian flag and single Canada. But I'll spare you that because my singing is not worthy. But I understand. So shout out to all of my fellow Canadian friends on the call today. I think there's a few of you out there. I recognize their names, and nice to see you online. I hope you're enjoying the panel so far. From a Canadian's perspective, everything what the panel said on a much smaller scale, of course. We always joke about in Canada that the Canadian economy is about 1/10 the size. So our problems are more or less plus or minus 1/10 the issue that you have in the US. And in fact, even Canadian exports and imports, a lot of them travel through those US ports because just the way the sailing routings work globally. Our 2 main international ports are Vancouver and Montreal, of course, and they have their challenges as well. A lot of them are to do with sort of congestion per se, but not quite to the scale that you had in Long Beach this past summer, Tracy. But certainly we have our challenges there. But in general, in Canada, there are some minor delays once it reaches port. Sometimes there's some weather issues we have in our great Canadian winters here that pose some challenges for us. But otherwise in Canada, we're generally okay in terms of transit times within our country. Ryan touched on the cross-border issue. Our trucks are getting across the border on a daily basis as we speak live here. Our drivers are fully vaccinated. There was some rules coming into play around vaccination of drivers coming into and out of Canada, but we're part of a Unigroup system, United Van Lines. It's a requirement for our drivers to be vaccinated. So all being said, in Canada, it's not we're not looking through rose-colored glasses here. There are some challenges, but not quite to the scale of the U.S. Mostly due to the magnitude. Right, we have 36 million people in Canada. You have 350 million. There's the 10% factor again. So a smaller scale, but we're not without the challenges. So a little bit on Canada. Shout out to my Canadians. Thanks.
Great, great. Thanks, Derek. Dave, another question here maybe for you. What do you think may be changed forever based on the recent challenges? And I know you may have touched on this, but anything else you'd like to elaborate on?
Sure. I think there are some significant things that have changed. Virtual surveys, we mentioned that that is here to stay. I think people enjoy that. They can do it at their leisure most of the time. I think micro moves, your micro move program, small shipment program is here to stay. I think we have to look at different ways of shipping household goods throughout the United States. That's a significant part of our business now. We've grown that pretty significantly. When you look at the industry, about 30% of all shipments are under 5,000 pounds, considered a small shipment. That's a huge number, and it's not getting any smaller. So I think micro moves, small shipment programs got to be a part of your program. People, the way we treat our customers, the empathy that we have for them, and people used to say critical to quality, and today it's critical to happiness. What is going to make our customers happy, and what do we need to do that? And so we look at what through the customer's eyes, and we ask them, what do you want? How do you want us to do this? So we can better serve them and make sure that we're hitting it on a one-on-one individual, not a mass group. And so we have to look at one size fits one, not one size fits all. Some other things, safety in the house, that was never approached before. Now you hear about it because of the crews wearing masks in the homes, carrying the virus. It's a two-way street. We see customers having the virus and telling our guys to come in and pack and load them. And we say, we can't quite do that. You got to leave and then we can do it. Same thing with our crews, right? We got to make sure that they're healthy and going into the homes, and that's never going to change. I think we're going to see that going on forever. Some other things that people might not be aware of, but like maintenance of your vehicles becomes critical now, because you cannot have a vehicle go down because you can't get it fixed. What would take a couple days to fix before will now take 3-4 weeks to fix it. There's not enough parts around. There's not enough mechanics. So maintenance of the vehicles, we have upped our game significantly there to make sure that none of our trucks break down on a unknown time frame. So there's a lot of changes that we've done and things that are going forward, and a lot of positive things, right? People talk about sustainability, and we've talked about sustainability forever in our industry. Fuel is our number one cost, number one thing that we can look at for sustainability, and we have to be fuel efficient because of the cost of fuel today. It's a big factor in the price of a move and the cost of running the business. So part of it is fuel consumption, and we're becoming much more fuel efficient in the way we manage our fleets to keep that cost low. Those are my ideas, Tom. I'm sure the panel's got some other ones too.
Okay, great. Thanks, David. Derek, anything you want to comment on? The question was, what do you think may be changed forever based on recent challenges?
Yeah, I mean, David hit a lot of the great ones there. Just sort of pulling back a little bit from sort of the 30,000 feet level, I would say it's just our approach to business will change forever. Status quo is just not good enough anymore. No one saw this pandemic coming, and if you did, then you should buy a lottery ticket, because it's pretty special if you saw this coming. And I don't know if we will ever see the next one coming like this, but I can tell you that there's a hypersensitivity around running our business in terms of looking ahead and trying to see what these obstacles are going to be, being dynamic and flexible. We were always all of that, but there's it's just ramped up sort of one level more from a strategic planning standpoint, and just really trying to get ahead of these and putting in systems in place to make sure that we have, disaster recovery, all of those requirements from a compliance standpoint that we have that we adhere to. It's just one level up. It's just and of course that comes with cost. The actual cost base for global mobility, like the cost base for everything. I mean, go to your local grocery store. A head of broccoli and a bag of milk is going to cost you more these days. And unfortunately, there's a rising tide here that's lifting all boats. And all of these additional requirements in our business, it just adds cost, unfortunately. And also just looking forensically at cost. The pandemic has really given us a chance to look inward and really forensically analyze, our cost structure. And to that point, David, sustainability and fuel comes into play as well. So it's a sustainability piece, it's cost management piece, and an overall, really strategic approach trying to get ahead of all these things. Not an easy task, but there's certainly hypersensitivity to it.
Great. Thanks, Derek. Next question, I kind of put this out to the group. Are there any laws or regulations that you see either that are recent, new, or down the pipe, making the ability difficult to navigate the current supply chain landscape? Anything on the horizon either? Anyone want to take that?
I'll chime in, Tom. The only thing, well, probably the most significant law that's in front of the Supreme Court is the AB5, the independent contractor law, and how that is applied. It's a California law right now, but it's significant around the country. If California is allowed to pass the AB5 law, which makes it almost impossible to have an independent contractor hauling household goods, will significantly change the landscape of our industry, and will have long-term effects because it'll apply. Other states will apply the same law. So we're watching it closely. Everybody's looking at it. There's our industry is full of independent contractors. We move a lot of household goods with independent contractors. Not sure how we would run the business without it, and it's a big challenge. Ryan, you guys probably have the same challenge.
We do, and it's forefront, right? And I think it's the uncertainty around what's going to happen with that makes that so difficult, David. It's right. We've been talking about that for the better part of 2.5 or 3 years now. So, on the bright side of the laws and regulations piece, which is something I don't often say, the government just passed the ability in some places for us to now get operators behind the wheel of a tractor trailer at a younger age. Now, how will we adapt to that as an industry? Not only do we have to train the driving component, but there's the customer service and the in-house component for the van operator. So we'll continue to watch and evolve that piece. AB5 is there. We're still dealing with the environmental regulations that tend to be out there. I don't know that they are heavily enforced, but I think as sustainability becomes more important for everyone for all the right reasons surrounding the challenges that brings, I think that'll become probably the next piece that we'll start to look heavily at, and how do we tackle that. So yeah, it's a piece that we keep our finger on the pulse of, and then try and prepare for that without overreacting to what may be coming down the pike.
Great, great. Thanks, Ryan. And I just want to remind everyone before we get into the last question for the panelists, feel free. The Q&A session will open up shortly, and you can put your questions into the chat, and we're happy to answer the ones that we can get to. So we'll get into the last question for the panelists. What's the single most important takeaway for our listeners today going into 2022? And Tracy, why don't we start with you?
Sure. I think, look, we're still in the thick of things, right? Let's be honest. But I do think there's hope that collectively we're going to be in a better place, really soon. I think in the interim, I would say continue to ask questions, take an opportunity to align with your service providers and use the tools in their toolboxes. We all really want to help support your programs and your valued employees. So let's continue to educate one another. And I think, with a little more time and as Derek alluded to, a little more patience and empathy, we'll see ourselves through this to the other side.
Awesome. Thanks, Tracy. Ryan, any closing comments here?
Yeah, for me, it's that continual communication around the planning, making sure that we're all elevating that piece as much as we possibly can. Tom, you and your team at Cartus do a great job working with us in the supply chain to make sure that we're prepared. And to the point that was made by, I think, everybody on the panel, right, the uncertainty that surrounds that and the ability to adapt and change and continue that communication is going to be of utmost importance over the next few months. And ultimately, I think we can all build on that to make this better in the long run. Eternal optimist.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. And Derek, your comments here?
Yeah, I would say lead time. I think we beat the horse pretty dead, and thanks to Dan for jumping in and supporting us there. Lead time really is a critical success factor for us, and I'm not sure, we don't have exact stats on correlation, but I'm pretty sure that the greater the lead time, the greater the chance of a better customer journey. It's they go hand in hand, and just a little bit of collaboration. And I would say we hear this a lot, and a little bit of kindness goes a long way. I think we're dealing with factors, most of which are kind of beyond our control. We're dealing with macroeconomic global supply and demand issues, of which it's difficult for the average household goods mover to control. And we are doing our best. We are in this together. We can certainly empathize with all of our corporate assignees. We're passionate about what we do. I mean, look at the years of service on this call here. We're in this to win it, guys. We want a great experience for your people because we care. We truly do. And some kindness from in this community, I think would help a lot as well. So thank you for that.
Great, thanks, Derek. And David, any thoughts on your end? Going into 2022.
Yeah, I think capacity is not unlimited. Everybody's competing for the capacity for the household good movers, and the corporate relocation piece is significant for us. That's our business. But there's also the military and the consumer business that takes that, if it gets priced below or better than the corporate business, a lot of the drivers want to head in that direction. So capacity is something we got to keep our eye on. We keep continuing to grow it. And with that in mind, you also have to have different ways of moving things, right? Whether it is through a micromove, a small shipment program, or through freight, or any other method that you can determine it as, to make sure that you have different ways of moving things and the ability to shift as needed. So those are the two biggest things we're looking at, and continue to grow the business and make sure that we can service the customer on the dates and times that they want.
Okay, great. Thanks, David. And yeah, just thanks to every one of the panelists here for sharing your experiences today in our current household goods landscape, as well as providing best practices and recommendations for our clients and prospects. Okay, I think we'll wrap it up. I'd like to thank everyone for attending the webinar today. Thanks again once to our panelists. Appreciate everybody's time. And look out for communication from us in the next couple of weeks that includes a recording of the session. In the meantime, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or your car's account representatives if you have any questions. Enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.